the core of our theology, and one of the greatest modern thinkers, one of the greatest revivists perhaps in the field of kalam, or kalam jadid, as it's been called. And it's a great honor, Professor Mehmet Ozalp, to witness this and to directly speak to you about your journey at this book, inshallah. Welcome.
Likewise, thank you very much, Sadiq.
Maybe first we'll just start with, and this is not your first book, without revealing our ages, about 20 years ago. I remember one of your other books was very popular too, 101 Questions. What is your, just if you can tell us a few words about your relationship with Sayyid Nursi, how did that happen?
Like everyone else, I guess we're all growing up, and like I've always been religious from the age of 10. You know, I started praying 5 times a day, fasting at the age of 10. So it always came natural to me, like nobody taught me. I self-learned everything. But there comes a time when when you get exposed to some atheistic and scientific philosophical objections to religion. And I experienced that, you know, in the university time. And I was really desperate looking at how can I get answers, remove my doubts from my heart and the mind. And I felt like my faith was slipping away from me. And this is when I came across writings of Sayyid Nursi, and reading them really saved my faith. And it also gave me a very good core conviction in the truth of Islam and its propositions that I carry today. So I really owe a lot to Sayyid Nursi. Also, not just his writings, but his life was an inspiration to me. Like his struggle during Ottoman era, his ideas of Islamic revivalism, and then 1925, in the modern Turkish Republic, he was jailed, exiled, and that struggle looked to me like an epic struggle, where he persevered and inspired a whole generation of Muslims to remain as Muslims.
Was it we were talking about this earlier today, was it his personality that captured you first, or his writings, if I can ask that?
It was his personality. When I heard about him at Redfern Mosque, I was studying there, and then I gotta get to know this person. I think one instance that really made me take notice of him, and he was there was a trial about his writing his books, and in the trial the judge asks, do you want Sharia? And they say, you want to turn Turkey into a Sharia state. He goes, if I was to be executed for one ruling of Sharia every day, and then repeated that for every other day, I would give my life away for rulings of Sharia. But that's not what I want. I'm here to save the faith of a nation.
And then you had this famous Melbourne trip, right, where you really studied it and broke it down to themes and categorized it.
I thought, I guess one of the also other difficulties of Saleh Nur, it doesn't go topic by topic. It has like chapters or parts, and he does bring in different things together sometimes. So I thought, like, wouldn't it be wonderful if I was to, first, before that, I had an experience I went somewhere and they said, look, you guys are just reading one page at a time, you never read the entire thing. Someone was critical of that. Because I thought I'm a student of Sayyid Nursi. They said, if you're a student of Sayyid Nursi, you should really study it in detail. And I thought, I was really upset, and I said, this person's right, I haven't really finished. So I decided to read the entire collection, which is like 13 books. And I said, if I read 10 pages a day, it will take me 2 years to finish it. I'm reading other things too, as well. So I did that. I finished the entire thing, which was extremely beneficial. Then after that, I thought, once you read the entire thing, I can see the full text. And I said, what needs to be done is that we need to reorganize this thematically. And I did a mapping. So basically, I developed a curriculum based on Risale-i-Nur of teaching Islamic beliefs and theology. And it came up 13 different modules. 13 different modules. And I decided to teach this because best way to learn is teaching, you know. So that's when the theology of Quran classes I started at Auburn Gallipoli Mosque. So I would advertise a module saying, you know, afterlife and resurrection in Islamic theology. That would go for 2-3 months. So I taught that. So it took 4 years to teach the entire text or the collection. And then after that, I said, I got to do a PhD on this now. You know, which I did, produce a PhD. So basically, this book is really that culmination of that work of thematic analysis of Said Nursi's books. But initially, I wanted to do the entire thing, but very quickly I found out it's too much. So I just reduced it to just a God in Islamic theology. And when doing that, of course, I didn't want to just do it on Said Nursi. I wanted to also cover classical Islamic theology.
You wanted to frame him in a
compare and contrast, and also discover, like research and discover how consistent is he to the classic Islamic theology. How much does he expand on things that classic theology left brief? How much original contributions he made in terms of analysis, explanation, and proofs? And sometimes he ignores some of the classical discussions, like, for example, nature of Quran. You know, he doesn't go into that because it's not debated in our time.
Yeah, inshallah, I want to get into some of these chapters about epistemology, causes, about qadr, and also just ma'rifah in general. But just one thing, and I guess this morning's discussion really made me highlight to me how important it is to put ourselves in a scholar's context. So he comes from the East, this brilliant Kurdish scholar, and all of a sudden he gets in a very short amount of time in the highest scholarly circle, Darul Hikmah, and then he's dealing with all these secular youth. What were some of the things that really caused him to try to bring this theology, that this legacy that he's trying to inherit? What were some of the problems that he was seeing?
Well, when
I particularly have that thing in mind where students come to him and saying, our teachers don't talk to us about Allah. And he famously says, listen to what they teach. No.
That happens later in the Republic era.
In the Republic era,
yeah.
But the seeds were there, the secularization.
That's before the collapse of. There's really, he calls them like all Said Nursi, before the collapse of Ottoman Empire and after. Like Said Nursi himself was a prodigy. Like he became basically a scholar at the age of 14. Had a photographic memory. He would read something and know it by heart. And he also combined intelligence as well. So when you combine photographic memory with very high level of intelligence, you get an amazing genius, basically. Like just to demonstrate his intelligence, his teacher tells him, here's an Arabic word, make up words. You know how in Arabic you can make up words, 10 words from this word. He makes up 20 words and puts them in a sentence. Now, not separate words, but all in a sentence. Just amazing, just on the spot. And he completed his education at the age of 14 or 15 or something like that. He had the robe, like scholarly robe, which he never wore at the time. But anyway, he goes into the intellectual circles in the Ottoman Empire, starts getting involved, speaking, writing, and he also sees a dream where he asks the Prophet, peace be upon him, for knowledge in his dream, and he says, knowledge will be given to you on the condition that you don't question my ummah. I think that's a very interesting And when he was in Istanbul, he puts a sign, all questions answers, no questions asked. So he never asked any question to anybody, being true to that, I guess, condition. So basically, he enters the Ottoman intellectual circle in Istanbul. What he sees is that the society was really fractured into two types of people produced through two types of education.
The maktabs and the madrasa.
Mektab and madrasa. Like the Ottoman Empire in the in 19th century, they tried to modernize, or we call it modernized today, but they called it terakki, or progress. Basically catching up to Europe in terms of progress. At every level, they're doing reforms. So you have this madrasa education, which has no science in it. Yeah. And instead of reforming that, they say, we'll establish a separate educational institution. They called it mektab. So they would study just like we study in schools today, science, maths, and very little religion. But the graduates of the madrasa they had this bigoted approach. They didn't understand the world. They didn't understand the universe. Lots of superstitious stuff. And a lot of memorization, nothing much. And then the mektabs, they studied, they were more enlightened or smart or understood the world, but they were irreligious. So he saw this as a major problem in society because they were clashing ideologically and also activity-wise. How they see the society should change. So he proposed a educational system where you would combine the both at the same time. So that was a major project for him. He called it Madrasatul Zahra. That would be like Athar University in modern-day Turkey. And you would study science and religion at the same time so that wisdom would prevail. And he even got money from Sultan Reshad, and they laid the foundations, but then the World War I broke. And then everything just collapsed. He was he was wounded and then captured by Russians.
He took a part in that war, right?
Yeah, he took part as a volunteer with his students. Yeah. Because he was defending their homeland, in eastern Turkey.
Against the Russians, right?
Yeah, the Russian invasion. So, there's a whole major story there. And then he eventually comes back to Istanbul, freed. And then Ottoman Empire collapsed. He realizes that the old civilization has collapsed. Yeah. And he needs to look for a new way. He looks for a guide. And he goes through a bit of a transformation spiritually, and he sees signs that he should just focus on the Quran and ulumul Quran and the truths of Quran, hakikatul Quraniya, as opposed to tafsir of Quran. Because he tried to write a tafsir. Like all of the revivalist movements, leaders that you find in early 20th century, Muhammad Abduh, Rashid Rida, and Sayyid Qutb, all of them did a tafsir of the Quran. They thought, if we explain Quran in a completely different way for our time, that'll be the starting point for revival. But who reads the tafsir? Who reads the entire tafsir? Only scholars do. So Sayyid Nursi decided, he said, to focus on only the iman aspects of the Quran, which is really the primary focus of the Quran anyway. And then decided to write Risale-i Nur, which is basically, he started up a revivalist movement that focused on the revival of Iman in individuals, which is very different to other reformist revivalist movements. And very clearly he denounced violence, like non-violence, and also no politics. This is very clear in his activism as well.
Almost like mirroring Imam Ghazali's reform,
you're right.
letting go of politics.
Exactly. When Imam Ghazali had that experience where he couldn't speak, he took that as a sign that he needs to leave politics, because he was in the thick of it in Baghdad. Yeah. He was in the Seljuk court. He was involved, and then when Malik Shah died, there was a whole turmoil. He was in between, so he says, "I got to get out of here." And he also realized, Imam Ghazali realized, for 20 years he worked with Nizam al-Mulk to build a madrasa, and just like Sayyid Nursi, he was trying to build a madrasa. And they did it, which is very influential. I mean, it wasn't to nothing, but then he realized it all collapsed. Like, he realized the futility of building Islamic revival on political grounds. So he goes, that's why he called Ihya al-Muddin.
Or even institutions.
Even institutions, yeah. Because he abandoned the madrasa. So he wrote Ihya al-Muddin, he called it, this is ilm al-akhirah. Yeah. His knowledge of the afterlife. And he wrote it for ordinary Muslims, not for scholars. That's exactly what Sayyid Nursi did. That he wrote these books in a way for ordinary Muslims to understand, internalize with conviction the beliefs of Islam. And so in a way he was trying to get maximum amount of people to read these books and benefit from it. And you see it in the letters from his students.
You didn't want to use this word, but what was it? Spiritual utilitarian, you said?
Utilitarianism, Utilitarianism says happiness for the greatest number of people, which is dominant philosophy, social philosophy in our society today. But he was like a spiritual utilitarian, the maximum amount of benefit to maximum amount of people.
Yeah, this has been a good sort of an introduction, but I want to now get a bit into the God in Islamic theology and when he goes to set out to prove Allah's existence, which is the core of our theology. What's unique in his approach, and how do you compare him to other attempts at the same project of establishing God, proving it, compared to classical Kalam tradition?
Interestingly, I think because the classic Kalam tradition, if anyone read books of Kalam, like Islamic theology, it's very rational.
That's right.
Very abstract, hard to follow. Even for myself, like I've studied logic and theology, I find it very hard. Or not hard, but very energy consuming. Like you gotta focus a lot, follow the line of reasoning, which many people can't do. So they did not write for ordinary people, they wrote for experts.
A bit elitist, scholarly elites,
Even Imam Ghazali, he has a book before Ihya al-Muddin, Al-Iqtisad fi al-Itiqad, which is a Kalam book, like theology book. When you read that, it's also the same, similar.
Heavily influenced by Greek mantra.
Heavily influenced by logic and reasoning only. And Sayyid Nursi calls this, he says this is not Quranic approach. He calls it, it's like let's say you're going to bring water to a town. He says, you bring the water from a distant stream, you lay all these pipes one after the other, and the water comes to the pipe. Basically difficult, hard to do. But he goes, instead you can dig a hole and get some artesian water directly from the ground. So that's what the Quranic methodology is.
The Asai Musa.
The
staff of Moses.
You directly access the truth or the water, life-giving thing, without heavy reasoning. The Quran does also reason as well. I actually use verses from the Quran in my logic classes. I identify the logical reasoning in this, but it's not very heavy like the Kalam books. So Sayyid Nursi doesn't go into that, but he does use proofs and reasoning with language. He does it. He puts images into your mind in two ways: analogy, like use of analogy, and use of very colorful language that people are familiar with, which is what Quran does. When you read the Quran, it looks ordinary language, but really, if you think about it, there's a lot of
analogies.
Like argument, use of analogies
pictures,
as well.
Pictures, speak through pictures.
Yeah, for example, in 22nd word, he talks about, he uses the word of a palace, and in that palace there's all these people living, all these things are happening. like he develops multiple arguments about God's existence from that analogy, and then he explains it in detail what the analogy means. Like, does God exist? If so, is God one or many? And how do I relate to God? These are the three fundamental questions, which I actually followed in my book as a framework. So when you say God exists, what stops you to say, well, maybe there are many gods, that just like in some religions. So it doesn't stop unless you specifically say there's only one God, and there's a prohibition to shirk, or what we call associating partnership with God. So that has to be proven as well, like one God. And Sayyid Nursi spends a lot of time on this, a lot of emphasis. That's why, like in my title, but what can I put? I put Tawheed in the title, because I think ultimately, like in his proofs of God's existence, Tawheed itself, and relating to God, his main focus is Tawheed. And in the classic proofs of Tawheed, there's two main proofs. What we call like Tadbir argument, that there's order in the universe, but there's order and relationships in the universe. Then there's the Tamanu or Tamattu argument, which is based on the verse in the Quran, chapter 21, verse 22. If there was more than one God, there would be chaos. There would be chaos in the world, on the universe. So based on that verse, they kind of, theologians argue that if you had more than one God and they both wanted to move a rock, there would be contradictions. If one of them says don't move, the other one says move. Either it will move, and the other one, the one who says don't move, is going to be relegated, so he cannot be God. So still you got to have one God. Or they will both agree all the time what to do, which is basically relegating to one will, again one God. So whichever way you go.
These are the classical proofs that.
That's right. Since there's order in the universe, it's a proof that there has to be one God. But what Sayyid Nursi does, but this is very hard to imagine. How do you imagine that? What he does is something brilliant. He actually, in 32nd word, he starts with like a cell, a red blood cell in the body, in the blood. And he says this, and he makes them speak as if they're talking. There's this devil's advocate, he calls it advocate of shirk. He goes, look, anyway, it's a long thing, but he says to this red blood cell, look, you act on your own, maybe you can exist on your own, maybe there's another creator. He goes, no, I cannot exist on my own. I need a cell to rely on, a blood stream and so on. Without that, I can't exist. And again, goes to the cell. Cell says the same thing. And all the way to the universe, like galaxies. So there is a unbroken interconnectedness in the entire universe. And he demonstrates this really well. I've never seen this in any theologian done this well. And a convincing, maybe because we are aided by our knowledge of science, philosophy, astronomy, we can easily picture these things. Like we know red blood cells, but in the past they didn't know these things. So he actually uses our scientific knowledge to the advantage of religion, like he uses it as empirical data source for our knowledge of the universe. And he's got other like proof with the ease of creation. Like he says, for example, you cannot have quality, abundance, and speed at the same time.
Quality, abundance, and speed.
Quality, abundance, and speed. Like one of them will be compromised. If you do something a lot, quality will be compromised. If you do it in quality, it will take time. But he says, when you look at the natural world, high quality, abundant, and very quick on the cosmic scale. So this can only be done by one God. If there's a one God, like in actual tadbir, and like he calls it rububiyyah. He touches on rububiyyah a lot. Basically, God's governance and operation in the universe.
And those pictures again, if like military uniform is going to be made in one place, it's easier. Or he says if someone comes into a mosque and he's not a Muslim, and he sees everyone moving, they either think they're connected with a rope or they're following the voice of one person. I mean, these are the things that sticks to the reader's mind, that very picturesque. Just quickly with the, these are, but we're getting close to Aksham, so Maghrib, and we'll go a bit into the spirituality, but just one more last thing on these rational things. And I think you were saying this whole naql and aql, and nearly every PhD thesis, every Islamic serious work these days touches on it. I know I had to touch on it too. What was Ustad Yunus's unique contribution to here?
This is a very important question. Like basically, it goes down to sources of knowledge. Like, how do we know what we know, and how do we know it's true? And we call this epistemology in philosophy. Now we really have to. I need to cover this. There's three really important phases in this epistemology, and we're looking at it from an Islamic perspective. So, when first Quran was revealed to the Arabs at the time, like the Arabs were Bedouin, they had no literature in terms of like books. There was nothing written. So basically, it was an oral culture and experiential, like there was practical wisdom and so on. So basically, when Quran came, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, as a teacher of the Quran and Prophet, that was a massive leap in sources of knowledge. So for the first time, they had a book, which is believed to be, I guess, even if a person doesn't believe in God, Quran being God revealed, when a society has nothing and then all of a sudden this very good book comes in, it's a big leap in your education and your sources of knowledge. But because Muslims believe in Quran being revealed God's word, you believe that, you accept that as true source of knowledge, which is revelation or naql. So initially, and then you had the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ's sayings and practices. So basically, the Quran Sunnah became the religious source of knowledge. And today, Muslims, they want to go back to that. But the thing is, you can't just go back to that. For that time, it was very good, like excellent and appropriate. But then what happened is, that's the first stage, right? The second stage is when Muslim world expanded. They went to very large geography from Spain to India. Now, at this point in time, you were exposed to different religions, different theologies. Hellenistic philosophy came in, which is Hellenistic philosophy is very influential. You can't dismiss it. Once you're exposed, you can't dismiss it. So with Hellenistic philosophy, particularly, reason came in, like using of intellect, your own observations, your own reasoning, as a source of knowledge. And there was a century or two of debate, like 9th, 10th centuries, a lot of debate within scholars, because some Muslim scholars felt that reason should be also source of knowledge, or aql.
And for some groups of Islam, it is.
It is, and Quran actually does talk about aql as well. So there was a basis for it in the Quran as well. But what happened, that kind of a struggle culminated in the Sunni theology, or Ash'ari and Maturidi Sunni theological school, where a balance was struck. You struck a balance. Basically, the balance was this. Reason or aql was incorporated as a source of knowledge on the condition that it was subservient to the revelation. So that was the deal, So okay, I'll take it in as a...
That was the peace treaty.
Yeah, and there's a way to show that as well. And that was great. So that went for a number of centuries, about 1,000 years. And then comes the modern era. In the modern era, now there's a third phase. And I really think Said Nursi is the only one who tackled this out of all the contemporary scholars, like scholars who came in the last 100 years or 150 years, but in a satisfactory way. The change was that we all of a sudden had a lot of knowledge about the universe and natural world through scientific discoveries. What do you do with this knowledge? And this is where Said Nursi, what he does is that he puts universe as a source of knowledge.
As opposed to aql.
Instead of aql, so he says there's like Quran and the Prophet ﷺ. He basically says there's three sources, three ways we can get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Quran, the Prophet ﷺ, and the universe. But you can combine like Quran and Sunnah as a naql and the universe. So this is happening for the first time. And he justifies this by saying, goes to Quran again, where Quran says there's ayah in the natural world, like there are verses that Allah revealed in the natural world. So basically, the natural world and the universe is book of creation. Quran is book of revelation. Because the universe is created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they shouldn't be, and the Quran is revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Quran is an expression of God's attribute of kalam, speech, and the universe is from his attributes of qudra, creation. So there shouldn't be any contradictions. Just one sec, please. Let me finish the argument.
We'll take questions after the break as well. We'll open up.
And then where does reason go to in this place? I actually read the entire thing and saying, what does it say about reason? And like he doesn't put reason as a separate source of knowledge. But his writings are very rational, by the way. He uses proofs a lot. So, but what he does is that he puts reason as an instrument. So reason is not a source. It's an instrument to test both naql and the universe and find the reconciliation between the two.
Remove apparent contradictions.
Exactly. And so basically the intellect or human reasoning is the mizan. It's an instrument. It cannot be source of knowledge.
That's right.
But you do, differentiate the truth, truth about what Revelation says, our interpretations of it, what universe is, our interpretation of the universe, if it's true or not. Imam Maturidi does this as well. Imam Maturidi, those of you, he lived in 10th century, passed away in 944, and he's the founder of a Maturidi school of theology. He says there are three sources of knowledge. He says Quran, khabar. Khabar he puts, I guess, like what people, something happened and you transmit that knowledge, and reason. But he says also reason is important because you can test a charlatan as opposed to a true prophet by your reasoning, because you can distinguish, look for certain qualities and conditions. How do you do that? By using your reason. So he puts reason as a bit of a on top.
I actually really like this because I've always heard, it's Quran but aql, but they say on the condition that it's aql salim, it's a sound aql. But it never really satisfied me because I find that a lot of people put too much emphasis on aql, and sometimes I see a bit of a Ibn Taymiyyah in myself as well, But this one, it's, the aql is a tool you do to make sure you look at that both books sort of matches, and it's very Quranic.
It's like an instrument, and you got to know how to use an instrument.
Yeah, sure.
Or you got to have mental fitness as well. That's why in our course we have a logic subject as a study area. I really think every Muslim should study logic. There's a lot of people put forward fallacious arguments, and yeah.
Well, my uncle wants to continue, but Revelation says we need to stop. We'll just go and pray. We'll come back. We'll take a few. We just want to touch on about his spirituality, the Ma'rifah concepts, because that's some of the nicest fruits of our discussion. And then hopefully we'll open the floor for Q&A, inshallah. We'll all reconvene at 8:15, inshallah. So. Ustaz Mehmet, First Mehmet, you mentioned in your book that perhaps his contribution to Ma'rifah, Islamic spirituality, has been one of his most greatest contributions. And elsewhere you describe that he sees kalam as a bit dry and he doesn't want to engage in it. Just wanted to clarify, it's not like he has a suspicion of kalam the way that Ibn Taymiyyah had, for example, where he's very skeptical. But it's just, I'm connecting that kalam and also back to spirituality. What was his most unique contributions in spirituality?
I think when we look at Ma'rifatullah, or understanding and experience of God, experience of Allah, is a spiritual concept. It was introduced by Ibn al-Arabi, or developed really a lot by Ibn al-Arabi. And it's been in the realm of Sufism, or let's say spiritual disciplines of Islam, rather than theology. And you never see these discussions in the theological books. Theological kalam books go as far as discussing attributes of God, like essential attributes of God, that God has wujud, like his existence or essence. He's one, he's unlike of his creation, he's got knowledge, power, speech, and so on. There's 13 or 14 attributes that all theologians agree. That's where they stop. They move on to other theological topics. Now there's two reasons I think Said Nursi goes into Ma'rifatullah field. The two reasons. The first one is that, remember that he's putting all of his eggs in one basket. When I say that, I mean it. He's limited in his time and place as to what he can say about Islam, what he can write about Islam. Because anything he writes, he's in jail, basically. And at that time, the madrasas and what they call tekkes, or zawiya and tekke, the spiritual hospices, the Sufi hospices, were closed by Turkish Republic. So the madrasas are closed, all these spiritual places are closed. Basically it becomes illegal to promote tasawwuf or Sufism. So in that climate, but you need spirituality as well, like people need spirituality, and that probably you need that more than anything. Because once you understand and internalize, once you accept God's existence, you internalize Tawheed. By the way, he goes, there's levels to Tawheed as well, appreciation of Tawheed. Then you've got to go to the spiritual part. That by default or naturally, and because we need it. So he brought spirituality into theology, basically, for that reason. For those two reasons. One is a human need or there's a natural progression. Does God exist? If so, is God one? How do I relate to God? That how do I relate to question is a spiritual, experiential question. So I think he broke a new ground with that. And in doing so, how he did it is important, because he's not a Sufi. He goes, I'm not a Sufi. He goes, Sufism is like fruit. Iman is like bread. He goes, you can live without fruit, but you cannot live without bread or carbohydrates, Depends where you come from, like rice, we can change that analogy to that. So he doesn't see it as like that essential, but he brought in as much as possible within the theological realm spirituality into his writings. He brings reason as well. In a way, he combines a lot of aspects.
Yeah,
of,
because
of religion.
he answers hard theological questions and doubts using names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
It's not the most common Kalam type approach. Like you said, the Kalam textbooks, unfortunately,
Exactly, they don't go into
talk
the
about
names of God.
Right.
But Quran is replete with names of God.
That's right.
And this is where Said Nursi, what he says is that there's a very important piece in his writings where he compares like philosophy, Sufism, like spiritual experiences, and Quranic way. Once again, he's Quran person. And he says that, so basically to cut it short, there's risks associated with, in some ways, like, because you can relate to God or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in three ways. You can either spiritually travel to God, which is the Sufi path,
Which he calls the Qurbiyah.
which he calls the Qurbiya, which that you're getting closer by your own endeavors and works and journey. And the other one is that you can assume God comes down to you, which he says that's, I guess, impossible because there's a creation problem. And also the third way is that to focus on names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when we focus on names, we get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And really, like, we understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and deep and meaningful way. And we see those names in ourselves, manifest in ourselves. We see those names manifest in the natural world. And in the Quran, because Quran is replete. And he gives a sun analogy. He goes, you can either, sun can come down to you, like enter into objects, which is impossible, or you can travel to the sun, which is difficult, or not for everybody. But then he says, you can just bring to your awareness that the sun is already close to you by its light and heat. You know, it strokes your skin. He calls that akrabiyya.
Yeah.
So there's qurbiyya or akrabiyya. Qurbiyya is your own journeying. Akrabiyya is God is already close to you. So all you have to do is raise your awareness, focus on these names and understand them. He says that that's why the Quran, like whenever Quran finishes a verse, like in a lot of places, it always finishes it with a name or two.
Yeah.
He says this Quran does this to show that whatever it's talking about, these names are manifesting. Like when Quran says Azizul Hakim, Ghafurur Rahim, you know, these expressions, finishes the verses with that. It's all related to the context of those verses. And this could be sometimes a natural description, sometimes an event that happens in society, or some experience that you may be having yourself.
Yeah.
So in all those situations, you can discover how these names show. But basically, that's right there in front of you.
Yeah.
Or that you just have to raise your awareness.
Many people said that Imam Ghazali solved some of the core theological problems by taking it to tasawwuf. But I think here Ustad Sayyid Nursi is bringing tasawwuf, but also that Ibn Arabi, the names approach to solve some of the most difficult. Yeah. And from what I gather, what you're saying, he's definitely on the camp of pro-tasawwuf. There's a lot of people like that. But it's not a tariqa-based tasawwuf, but it's more thematic. And within that pro-camp of tasawwuf is from a Quranic
In his Mektubat, he has a whole treatment of Sufism.
Yeah.
He says there are advantages, disadvantages, risks, benefits.
And he had himself dealings with the Naqshbandi, Qadiriyya, Tariqa.
He's actually qualified to teach tasawwuf,
right.
but he never went down that path. But he sort of brought in spiritual concepts as far as Quran allows, and as far as it fits with the theological framework. He didn't take it too far into subjective, experiences,
yeah.
or metaphysical explanations that you cannot prove,
yeah.
Which is usually the case with the.
But it's amazing.
He's,
I mean,
by the way, he's critical of Ibn al-Arabi.
on aspects of Wahdat al-Wujud,
Yeah.
I guess we won't go into that right now. I have more questions to ask, but I have promised everyone to allow. Just as a reminder, if we can have Q and answers, question and answers, because of the limitations of time, it would be nice to get comments, but we just want more questions right now. So questions, and if there's not questions, I have plenty myself as well.
Just because I said he's critical, let me just in one sentence, he says, Ibn al-Arabi is a murshid, but he's not a murshid in every topic.
That's right, yeah. And he's very careful in the way with a lot of adab, the way he expresses difference of opinion, all right, I would open the floor for Q&A. If there's any questions, just feel free to put your hand up. Yes, Brother Harris.
Yeah, Professor, would you recommend any intro works to Sayyid Nursi, or even just your own book? So I'm just looking for that as a name.
Could you repeat the question?
Question was, would you recommend any introductory text for Sayyid Nursi, or your book, or other than your book?
I highly recommend Shukran Wahida's intellectual biography of Sayyid Nursi, which gives his life and also contextualizes his works within his life. That's one of the best books there is on Sayyid Nursi's life story.
What was the author's name?
Shukran Wahida, intellectual biography of Sayyid Nursi and Turkey or something like that. And in terms of books written on Risale-i-Nur or covering its, unfortunately, there's a lot of like conference type of books, like articles. Interesting, like when I was doing my research, like Sayyid Nursi's, most of his writings about faith, about God. None of these conferences were about God. There's very little written on what Sayyid Nursi is talking about God. I found that quite extraordinary. So there's really two books that's really available that has a very good treatment of Sayyid Nursi's writings that just does justice to it. That's Colin Turner's book. It's called Quran Explained. He does a thematic, he covers Sayyid Nursi's writings thematically, and he's got like extensive quotations. So without reading his works, you're reading his works, and he explains it, brings it. I found that's an excellent book. And the second one is my book, and unfortunately, that's the field is so narrow. And my book is good in a sense that it contextualizes his writings within classic Islamic theology, like within the broad Islamic theological discipline, whereas Colin Turner's one doesn't.
Okay, thank you for that question. Anyone else?
But like today I was reading my book actually just to refresh some of the things I've written in my mind. I actually liked it. Like I'm not saying that some people like we normally you don't like listening to yourself. You don't like reading your own writing. Sometimes you see mistakes in it, and I was pleasantly surprised to find that look, I'm actually benefiting from this. I'm not saying it just because I wrote it, but honestly, I've written it in a way that for if you're not an expert in Islamic theology, you can still read it and understand it. It's very clear, well structured, and it flows well. So I spent a lot of time on that aspect because I want people to really benefit from it, inshallah.
How many copies do we have for Jamaat?
20 copies today, yeah. I guess, by the way, I'm not going to make much money. You don't make money writing these kind of books. So I'm not trying to sell it for that reason.
Okay. We had Brother Mirwais at the back, and then Brother Wael. Sorry, Brother Wael.
Thank you very much. My question is, raising as a Muslim, especially, we know Allah from the very beginning, and we are in touch with that in terms of the Quran. But how do you recommend, raising as a Muslim? Why do we need this book to read? So, if you can explain that.
The problem that we have.
Just to repeat the question, us as Muslims, we're already aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so what is the average Muslim in need of a book like this? What's the highlight for it?
Look, we could be aware of, yes, a Muslim believes in Allah, believes in God, and they may worship. But there's a number of issues there, a number of problems can arise. Like, if there's nothing wrong with your faith, excellent. You may need to focus on other things. But sometimes we get exposed to a lot of philosophies or different religious explanations of things and creates doubts in your mind. Doubts about, does God really exist? Or is there an afterlife, really? So these are very fundamental questions. And if they're on shaky ground, your entire faith could collapse. And you don't know when that could happen. And I'll tell you, I know somebody who was the most very good Muslim for years, and almost Hafiz, right, memorizing of the Quran. And he got stuck on this, do humans have will or not? He's been watching these YouTube videos, and there's a lot of stuff on that. Don't watch them. And he came to the conclusion that we don't have a will. And from that, his entire faith collapsed. And he's almost going to be an atheist. And we had a 4-hour conversation once. And eventually I convinced him that there is, we have will. And because we have consciousness. And but he was saying something like, yeah, but in your mind, there's all these processes happening in your brain. You're not even aware of it, and they're prompting you to how to think, how to do, even what to choose to eat. You're not in control of yourself. I gave him an example. He goes, brother, once it was cold. I was really tired. I do cycling, by the way, so it was cold. I was tired. Everything in my body, my brain, my impulses were saying, don't cycle. I was just lying there uncomfortably. I could have slept and stayed at home. But I used all my willpower to make myself get up and go out and cycle. So don't tell me will doesn't exist, because I've experienced it. And then, so that was really, that sort of kind of convinced him. But I guess I gave that example to show that our faith could be on a shaky ground. We need to make it protected with proofs, with convictions. So like Sayyid Nursi himself calls, there are 3 layers to your beliefs, or certainty, yaqeen. Ilm al-yaqeen, ayn al-yaqeen, haqq al-yaqeen. Certainty by knowledge, certainty by seeing, and certainty by witnessing or experiencing. And this is, by the way, this is above taqleed, above imitation. So most people are at the level of taqleed. Forget about even the lowest level of yaqeen, ilm al-yaqeen. So often he says in his writings, if you read this piece, he says if your iman is taqleed, it'll go to ilm al-yaqeen. If it's at ilm al-yaqeen, it'll go ayn al-yaqeen. Like he says this will leap you into the next level. And I know by my own experience, like even though I'm in the field, I've been a Muslim all my life, pretty teaching. Honestly, if I don't read his writings from time to time, I feel my faith is weakening. And when I read it, it's like tafakkur. Like when you're actually doing reflection that the Quran encourages Muslims to do on the creation and relating that to the Creator. That act in itself, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, it's more valuable, like 1 hour of reflection is more valuable and beneficial to you than 1,000 cycles of prayer. Well, that's amazing. Like 1,000 cycles is a lot. If you do 100 cycles, it'll take you at least 3-4 hours. By the way, when we get the museum land, I said, I'm going to pray 100 cycles of prayer as a nadhir, you know, and inshallah, I'm saying that now because I'm committing myself to this. Inshallah, I'll do that.
Inshallah. We just had Brother Wa'il first, and then...
I guess my question related to
Okay, that was answered?
From a kind of a audience perspective, where do you see this book who do you see this book headed for the most? So when you were writing this book, who were you writing it for? And who do you think would benefit the most? Even from the levels of Muslim society?
Yeah,
Just
sure.
for the recording, who is the real target audience of this book?
Well, this book is a product of research, so it's a scholarly work. It's not just, you know, my own interpretations or writings. I did research. There's a lot of sources were used, in addition to Said Nursi's entire works. So it's a scholarly work, published by a, you know, very well-known publisher, and but it's written in an accessible language for ordinary Muslims. If you wanna excel in I guess in Islamic disciplines, if you want to study Islam, like theology or beliefs of Islam is one field that you should be good at. So this is an excellent, I feel like I wanted to make a contribution to the revival of theology in our time. Theology is a bit of a dead discipline in Islam. Well, I don't want to say dead, but like in comparison to, everyone wants to be a Sharia expert or tafsir expert, but nobody wants to be a theologian in the Muslim community. In Christian community, theology is the king. In Islamic community, it's the Sharia is the king. So, but theology is usuluddin, it's the foundation of religion, foundation of your faith. So I really feel that I actually wrote about how you can bring theology into Sharia as well. With my work with Clive, you know, we did on environment. I've written some work, which, by the way, that's our next book. I'm working with Clive on a book on Christian Muslim responses to climate change. We're co-authoring that, inshallah.
So would you say primarily an academic audience, primarily, and then at a secondary level?
It's both.
Intellectual Muslims.
I've written for both, and yeah.
A bit of both, okay. All right, we just had a few more. Okay, I'm lost, but I think Osman first, then Abu Bakr. Osman, brother.
I think my question is sort of related to previous two questions as well, in that you also touched on the fact that theology is almost dead in Islam. Do you think, what are the reason behind that to start with? And secondly, do you think that theology as a subject is an advanced subject for average Muslim? Would you actually say that exploring the topics and concept in this book on your own, would that be a dangerous thing to do? Should we be the students of you, not only the reader of the book?
Yeah.
Can I do one? Can I just take two more questions, because they've told me we've got 3 minutes left, and then we can hear all the 3 questions, and then you
That's
answer.
a very important question, that one.
Yeah, it is. Just in case if we don't get time.
Okay.
Abak, if you can ask your question as well. So this first question was, is it too advanced? Is that why do you recommend someone to embark on this journey by themselves?
I was going to ask, looking forward, next 20 to 30 years, what do you see emerging as the greatest threat to Islamic theology, and does the Nursian approach, is that like future-proof?
Excellent question too.
See, that's why we've got to listen to all the questions. What's the next major theological challenges that you foresee in the next 20 to 30 years? And can Nursi's methodology suffice for that in combating that? And Ustaz Mehmet, Saral.
Yeah, just a lot of scholars have looked at the mujaddids of the last 1400 years, and some have claimed that Said Nursi was the mujaddid of the 20th century. I just want to ask, Dr. Ibrahim Ibn Muhammad also, he wrote a book on it, on Said Nursi, who's the Mufti of Australia, claiming that he's the mujaddid of the 20th century as well. So I want to ask Mehmet what he thinks, his thoughts on that topic, and why Silence is important in the theology.
And that question is, do you agree with the Mufti of Australia and that he's the Mujaddid? We have 1 minute. 3 questions.
We can't answer it in 1 minute. These are all excellent. If you don't mind, I guess we can go maybe up to 8:50.
8:50, okay, 5 minutes.
So I'll just try to answer that as quickly as possible. Sorry, we'll go from that one, last one, and backwards. Look, Said Nursi wrote in a Mujaddidi language. Like Imam Ghazali was a Mujaddid. He even claimed it himself, or he accepted. And his work, Ihya Ulumuddin, address entire Muslims, express fundamental teachings of Islam in a unique and self-evident way. That's the criteria of Mujaddid. And then we go to, like, let's say, Ahmed Sirhindi, 17th century Muslim scholar in India. He saved, I guess, Islam in the Indian subcontinent, which is now half of the world's Muslim population. He wrote in a Mujaddidi way, re-expressing fundamental teachings of Islam in a unified and self-evident way. I really think Said Nursi did the same. He taught fundamental teachings of Islam in a holistic, in a way, in a self-evident language for ordinary people to understand. Because when you read the thing about Mujaddidi language approach is, when you read it, you say, oh yeah, this is Islam. As an ordinary Muslim, you don't have to prove that it's Islamic, fundamentally Islamic. Whereas others, you sometimes struggle, is this really Islam? Or, you got to argue things. So I agree with that. I agree with that. He was really a renewer of the 20th century. His works and his approach is now the common denominator. Whether he influenced people directly or indirectly. His approach is now a common denominator in the Muslim world. It wasn't the case in the past, 100 years ago. I guess that could be argued. I can argue that even at a greater level, but we don't have time. Now, with Abu Bakr's question, is Risale-i Nur or writings of Said Nursi relevant for our time? There was actually a conference a couple of months ago, or last year I should say, in America, and I did exactly that topic. My presentation was about how relevant is Said Nursi? Is it still relevant? I put a bit of a framework and a bit of a criteria, and my conclusion was, yes, it is relevant.
In the next 20 to 30 years?
Even beyond, because people are becoming irreligious at a massive scale. People are becoming atheists, moving away from religion, massive scale. As Muslim societies open up even more, like even Saudi Arabia, like we got 15-20% of the population has got serious questions about faith. And also the primacy of science, our knowledge of the universe is still there, and his proofs and his arguments are relevant, like they haven't been refuted. And the way that the only thing is that we need a stronger spiritual aspects, because I think like Risale-i Nur or Said Nursi is limited in that way, because for the reasons I explained already. And also we do need fiqh solutions like the Sharia, Islamic law and ethics, because there are more Muslims that are practicing now. They want, solutions to ethical solutions to the issues that are coming up. So that's also needed, and Risale-i Nur doesn't go into that at all. It's I would say it's relevant, it's necessary, but it's not the only. It's not his books will not give you everything that Muslims need in our time. What was Osman's question? Osman,
is it for advanced students?
Advanced topic for average Muslim.
Theology is not too advanced, but I really think there's a historical fear in going theology, and also some of the Salafi influence in our time has been very much against theology and interpretation in the theological realm or discussion at all. And actually the first chapter of the book is called Theologian's Tension. Theologian tension, like theology has always been in the Islamic tradition, an area seen as dangerous to go into, because, like Imam Shafi said, like you can debate about ethical issues and no one's going to claim that you get out of religion, but if you debate about theological matters, you can charge somebody, excommunicate somebody. So that's a bit of a risky ground. But then he wrote theological things as well. Like Muslim theologians have always only talked about religion when they had to. Sorry, theology when they had to. Imam Abu Hanifa defended, he was very heavily involved. He goes, look, these people are, there are people out there who are making theological interpretations and conclusions, and then based on that declaring as murtad, and then killing you, and they go into violence. So you gotta defend the right beliefs. So, and it was always seen as a defensive field, and something a risky field. So there was this tension in theologians: do I go into it, or do I not? And then they felt that tension in themselves. There was a duty to do, but it was risky, and some of them took the courage and went into the field. I think that in our time, and sometimes it was always also seen, theology was the problem of the intellectual people who think a lot, The ordinary people, they want stories, they like admonition, you go to the mosque, you listen to a sermon once a week, that's enough. But that's not enough in our time. I think one of the biggest, most important argument of Sayyid Nursi, and I discussed it at the beginning, he goes, I'm trying to address two problems, two main issues. Because the first, in the past, disbelief used to come from ignorance. And only a very small amount of people who were, I guess, too smart for themselves. But in our time, it goes, disbelief is coming from knowledge and education. The more knowledge you've got, unless you have theological answers, it can make you a disbeliever very easily. And we know that, we see that all around us. So he goes, this time is different. So has to be the foundation. And the second reason, he says, I want to show that there is spiritual pain and emotional suffering in sinning or leading a non-godly life. That this will eat you inside if you lead a life like that. But if I can show that, then it will make a person follow a religious path naturally. These are his two fundamental aims.